So a lot of publications have been covering this story from a new Harvard study that's basically saying that they underestimated how much people were willing to compromise to work remotely. So you can find this article on a few different places. Fortune.com has this if you are a Fortune.com subscriber, and they're talking about how people are willing to take a major pay cut up to 25%, according to a Harvard study. Now, you can also find this article on Yahoo Finance as well, and you can find this actual study on the Harvard Business School website. So I'll link to the sources for this as well. So a lot of this started during the pandemic where people finally got to work remotely. They got a taste of it. Many companies experimented with it, and a lot of people did not want to go back. So we've had this movement now where a lot of companies are having people return to office, which is kind of the RTO movement, which obviously a lot of people hate. So many large companies are doing this, like Amazon, Walmart, JP Morgan, Uber, and others that are basically having people come back to the office. They actually had a late 2025 study by researchers at Harvard, Brown University, and UCLA showing workers will value remote work so much they're willing to take a massive pay cut of up to approximately 25% of total compensation for a job that is otherwise identical but offers partially or fully remote work instead of being fully in person. So in other words, to put it in perspective, if someone got a $200,000 job offer and a $150,000 job offer that was remote, they would take the $150,000 job offer, work fully from home instead of fully commuting 5 days a week for $200,000. So the thing is, we've had studies like this before that said people were willing to take a little bit of a pay cut, but it's actually showing with the new data from late 2025 that it's actually a much higher number. It's a much bigger impact than they thought. Like in 2025, LinkedIn released a study showing nearly 40% of Gen Z and millennial workers said they would be willing to take a pay cut to work remotely. In fact, some companies, in a 2025 study done by Robert Half, which is a staffing agency, many companies were actually using that as a way to get an employee or a potential candidate for a new job to sign on if there was a gap in what the candidate wanted in salary and what the company was willing to offer. So instead of giving the candidate more money, sometimes they would get them to sign on by offering remote or hybrid work. So that shows you that it's almost as valuable as the amount of money you're making. So out of all workers that were actually surveyed, about 40% of them said they would accept a pay cut of 5% or more. Another 9% of respondents would trade 20% or more of their salaries to avoid the office. So 40% of respondents would take at least a 5% pay cut to work from home. 21% of respondents would take at least a 10% pay cut or more, and then 9% of respondents would take at least 20% or more to work from home. So if you actually haven't seen this tool yet, I built this tool, which is a work from home savings calculator that I will have a link to in the video description. If you want to see how much you specifically in your situation would save in this scenario where you switch to working from home and you sacrificed your commute. So just on average, for instance, you can drag this to 5 days a week. I think most people will be using the 5 days a week as a benchmark here because you're probably working full time. And if you're commuting 5 days a week, for instance, a round trip commute on average is pretty close to 30 miles. Commute time on average round trip is pretty close to 60 minutes a day. And then daily food and coffee cost, I kept that pretty low. It's actually a higher average than that, but we'll keep that at say $15 a day. So that's literally like the cost of maybe one fast food meal at lunch and probably not stopping to get coffee, because then it would probably be at least another $5 or $6 if you were also getting coffee or if you were eating at a place where you would typically like sit down to eat. Annual salary, we're just keeping that around the median salary in the United States, which would be about $65,000 a year. And then we can also factor in the monetary value of reclaimed time. So if you want to factor in time, you can, which this will basically tell you, like, based on how much you make per hour, you're sacrificing this much money or this much value of time per year by commuting. So when you calculate the verdict here, so we saw what percentage people were willing to give up to work from home. Well, a dollar amount, if you're just going based off of American averages in the US, that could be somewhere around $17,000 per year in calculated annual savings. Again, this is just an estimate based on averages, but this would be the equivalent of $8.29 per hour more in terms of a pay raise. So your commute expenses on average, if you're anywhere close to the American average, you could save around $5,200 a year. Food and social costs about $3,900 per year. And that's again on the low end. Monetary value of time, if you're making around the median salary, you could be saving $8,000 or so per year in saved time, and also reclaim about 10.8 days of personal life per year. So you're saving 10 days of time and basically getting the equivalent of $8 per hour more by switching from commuting 5 days a week to working remotely 5 days a week. So when you actually see the numbers, you can see the perspective of why so many people, 40% or so of the population, is willing to compromise a little bit of their salary to work remotely. In fact, if you showed them this, they would probably have a higher percentage of respondents willing to do it when they saw the equivalent of what they're getting back.